This is a video that will demonstrate how to apply bias spacing and use that as a hem. So the first thing that we have here is we're going to look at our patterns, because our patterns always tell us what we need to do. As you can see, this is a perfectly rectangled pattern. It has 5/8 inch seam allowances on each side, and there's some stay stitching about 1/8 of an inch along the top of that sample, again to prevent it from raveling. And just getting kind of moved, any sort of movement that might occur during the construction process. We can also see at the bottom of this pattern that it says that it indicates where the hemline is, and so this is where the actual hemline is here, and so that means that we're really not going to be turning it up like we did in our previous sample. We're attaching something here because it says a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We also have another pattern piece that goes with this, and this is the bias facing hem. So this is actually we created essentially bias tape. If you've ever bought bias tape from a package store, what we did is we created that by cutting this strip along the along the bias, and as you can see, we've already indicated our 1/4 inch fold under along the top edge as well as along the bottom. So the first step that I did, and I did this off camera to just save a little bit of time, is that I folded that bias strip. I folded back that 1/4 of an inch along the top and along the bottom, and I pressed that into place. So that's the first thing that you're going to want to do. When we're using our main sleeve, our faux sleeve area, the first thing that we're probably going to want to do is to go ahead and put in that row of stay stitching, just so that it's in here and we don't have to worry about it again. So again, you don't have to perform any sort of back stitching when you do this stay stitching, and I'm going to just run that raw edge right along the 1/8 inch mark. Looking at my bobbin, my clear bobbin cover guideline there for 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to go ahead and pull that out and trim that about a 1/4 inch away, because that's, again, these thread tails are going to end up in a side seam, which is what we're going to do next. So placing right sides together, what we're going to want to do is go ahead and stitch close this underarm area of our sleeve. So if you want to, if you feel you need to put some pins down, go ahead and put some pins in. I feel pretty confident that I can sew this straight line, especially because there's not any curves to it. It's on grain. I shouldn't have any problems with keeping my raw edges matched up. So I'm just going to go ahead and hold onto my thread tails and lower that needle in. I'm going to do some back stitching at the top of this stitch line as well as at the bottom, and I'm just watching that 5/8 inch seam allowance, or that 5/8 inch guideline along the side of my throat plate and bobbin cover. Whoops. Alright, the next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to turn this sleeve to the right side. So I'm going to go ahead and do a finger press here. Again, when you're done with all of your samples, you're going to want to take this over to the ironing board and put this over the sleeve roll. Hopefully it'll fit. It's going to be a fairly tight squeeze. If it doesn't, then the finger pressing will probably do the job. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this to the right side. And according to our pattern, I now know which is the top and which is the bottom because I have this stay stitching here. And according to our pattern, we have a 1/4 inch seam allowance already allotted to go ahead and stitch that bias tape to the edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bias tape and I'm going to open it up, but I can still see where that crease line was from the iron. So what I'm going to do is I opened up that folded edge, and I'm going to pin this facing piece, this bias strip, to the sleeve edge with right sides together, and then as I approach the ends, so where these ends match up, I'm just going to overlap them and kind of create a diagonal seam. So that's what we're going to do in this step. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm pinning this in place, and I mean, although it kind of stinks, I'm going to have to take it off here in a moment so I can create an enclosed an enclosure that then, like a circular tube out of this bias tape, that I can then go ahead and attached to the sleeve as one circular unit. But we have to do this step to make sure that we do have things matched up properly. So I'm just going around that open edge, that raw edge, the bottom of the sleeve here, and I'm pinning my bias facing to the sleeve. And what I'm doing is I started just to one side of that underarm seam where I press that seam open, and I'm going to come back in. I'm going to place a pin just on the other side, so where I'm finishing up. Alright. And what I want to do is we want to stitch this at an angle. So I'm going to come in with I have this laid flat, and as you can see, here's my seam. It's coming right down in between there. But because we cut this on the bias, we want to sew it on the bias. So sew it with it here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come in where that kind of start at that bottom where we first pinned our first piece to, and we're going to angle that up to the corner and just draw a line connecting those two. So I'm starting at the pin and I'm crossing that over, and I'm just drawing a diagonal line, and I want to make sure that I'm going to catch all my fabric when I go ahead and do that. So as you can see, when I cross that over, here's my pin down here, and I'm going to, when I open it back up, I shouldn't have any problems with sewing that straight across on there. So there's my line, and I'm going to leave this pin kind of in place to show where it should start and stop at. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of do another marking here. I'm going to go ahead and open. Now I'm going to take all my, ooh, I didn't want to take that one out. I'm going to just leave this pin that was starting at my seam line. I'm going to leave that in, and then I'm going to take all the rest of these off. Oh my gosh, did I pull that out again? No, I didn't. It's still in there. Alright, so I'm going to pull the rest of these pins off, and then I have a separate facing unit here. And what I want to do is I want to match up with my right sides together where that pin was and that marking. And then I'm just going to go ahead and stitch on that line. The book says to sew a diagonal line, but I'm not 100% sure if that's the case. I'm going to go ahead and just do a vertical line right where that where my seams matched up. I'm going to just put this underneath because it's already cut on the bias, and I'm just going to stitch straight from where I drew that marking and where my pin had matched up on the other side. So I'm just going to do a quick straight stitch for where the bias is matched up, and I can use my guide on the right hand side to make sure that I am stitching right, or stitching flush in a straight line all the way down. Alright, I'm going to do some back stitching at the end of that. Go ahead and pull that out. Alright, then what I can do is I'm just going to go ahead and trim those seam allowances and finger press that open. Okay. Then what I can do is I can go ahead and realign this here, putting right sides together, and I'm going to line up that underarm seam again. So I'm just going to kind of wrap that around and then match up those seams so that they're right sides together on the edges. Right sides together, matching up those underarm seams, the underarm seam with the bias seam that I just made. And I'm not honestly 100% sure. Like, the book says to cut it at an angle, and they do like this diagonal seaming, but I mean, mine seems to match up okay, so I'm not too worried about it. If you're following along in your textbook and you know this makes sense to you, what they're trying to say, please let me know, because I'm like, I don't follow exactly what they're saying in the textbook, but I think that this will give us the same finished product in the end. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue to pin around this opening. And I'm almost back to where I started, and everything's matching up just fine. Whenever you do work with kind of a bias of any sort of cut, you have a little bit more leeway. You know, if you think you might have cut it a little small, don't freak out. Or, you know, if you're like, oh, I didn't match up all my markings perfectly, and then I stitched a straight line, there is that extra give that occurs when you cut things on the bias, so you can usually stretch it to fit. Alright, now we need to stitch this on that 1/4 inch marking, because that's what our seam allowance was allotted to, and we also had that the 1/4 inch turn under on our bias strip. So make sure that you can identify where the 1/4 inch marking is on your bobbin cover that shows all the different measurement guidelines. So I'm going to just line mine up with that 1/4 inch. Go ahead and lower my needle in. And again, I'm not going to do any back stitching. I wanted to, my finger was there because it's natural. And I'm just going to do some of that overlap stitching again. So this is kind of a small area again, so if your pins are kind of getting in the way, push them in a little bit farther, and then you can pull them out as we get closer. So I'm stitching on the inside of our sample, and I'm watching my guideline at that 1/4 inch marking. And I want to make sure that when I stop, my needle's in the down position, because just in case fabric moves around at all. And because we're moving in a circular motion, and this is a fairly small circle, we want to make sure that we keep our fabric as straight as possible, and we're just going to do little motions and turning at a time. And I know that I heard some of you guys talking in class that on your machines that you have at home, you have the ability to take off this piece and kind of wrap a circular tube area around, like an armhole or a sleeve opening like this. So if you prefer to, you know, maybe finish and complete this step on your home machine because you're more familiar with that, that's fine. If you think that it'll help you to produce a better final product in the end. So just keep that in mind if that's something that you choose to do. I also think that our sewing machines in the overflow lab, since they're not set down into a table, might be able to do that as well. We might have to look at it, but so I've just been sewing around this tubular opening and stitching at a 1/4 inch, because that's what our seam allowance was on our pattern, and I'm approaching that underarm seam again, and so I'm just going to overlap about 4 stitches. I'm going to go ahead and pull that out and trim up those thread tails real good. Real tight there on close to the fabric, and I can toss those aside. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to turn this to the inside. What we've done is we've repinned that facing to the sleeve with our raw edges even, and then we just stitch that into place using that fold line. And then what we want to do is we want to fold this back under and press those seam allowances to the inside, and then press that flat. So then we might want to do 2 pressings, like press it once so that those seam allowances are going back, and then we can flip this to the inside, this facing piece to the inside. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn my whole sleeve inside out so I can actually see what I'm working on here. So now my bias facing piece that I had made is now on the inside, and it has this nice finished edge along the bottom. And what I can go ahead and do, and you want to make sure that you know, if there is any sort of kind of wanting to roll to the inside, that you're facing, that the facing isn't creeping to the inside or to the right side of the fabric. We want to make sure that that facing is, that bias facing that we just stitched in is along the wrong side of our fabric, along the inside of our sleeve. Alright, now what you can see is, hopefully you can see on this video, is that I can still see my crease line from where I first did that first pressing, folding under the 1/4 inch. And so what we want to do now is we want to go back and fold that under again. And as you can see, we're enclosing everything. There's not going to be any raw edges. So I'm just going to turn that under all the way around, and then I'm just going to go ahead and place a couple pins in place here just to keep that folded edge in place. I just need a few, and I'm going to place those all around the edge. I think I did 3 or 4, I wasn't counting. And then what I need to do is I need to go back in and I need to slip stitch this into place. And for those of you that it may have been a little while since you last picked up a hand sewing needle, go ahead and brush the dust off of that. And I'll do a quick demonstration of how to do the slip stitch, and then I'm going to go off camera, and that'll be the end of this demonstration, and you can finish that on your own. What I have is I have a 1 thick thread one thickness of thread strung through my needle here, and I'm using a beading needle because I'm at home and this is what I have to work with, but it's looking a little rough. I've used it here. So what I'm going to do is I went ahead and put a knot on that far end. I'm going to come in from behind my seam allowance to start, just so I have a good solid knot, and I'm going to push that up through that fold line from my bias tape, and then I'm going to pull that through. And then I'm going to come back on top and just grab a little bit of fabric from that seam allowance and go ahead and pull that through. And then for the slip stitch, what you do is you run, the key is to run that needle along that fold line. You're slipping it along the fold. And you know, this is pressed and it's probably going to stay in place fairly well. So I'm going to go ahead and slip things about 1/2 inch. And then right on top of that fold line, I'm going to come and grab just a few yarns from on the sleeve portion of our sample. And then I'm going to go back in just opposite from where that thread came out, back into the fold. I'm going to run that needle along the inside of that fold line about 1/2 inch. Go ahead and push that back out. And then I'm going to come back right opposite of where that thread came out, grab a couple yarns. 1 or 2 is what you should shoot for, because then you're going to have minimal showing on the front side. And then come back in along that fold, run my needle across about 1/2 inch, pull that out. Right opposite from where the thread came out, I'm going to grab a yarn or 2 of that woven fabric, go up and in and out, back towards you, and then jump back into that fold line again. Slide it for about 1/2 inch, pull it back out. So what you can see hopefully is that there's very minimal showing. It looks kind of like almost like an upside down V. Very small from what you can see from the back side, and then on the front side, you really, if anything, you barely see anything at all. So that's what you want. You don't want to see anything there. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish up this slip stitching off camera, and this is the sleeve finish using a bias facing. So we completed the hem right at that wrist line using a formed and shaped and measured bias facing. So if you have any questions about measuring this prior to cutting your pattern, let me know. I pattern this for you, but there is kind of an equation to follow when you pattern this if you are interested in creating something like this on your own. So just make sure that you label this. Again, it's the sleeve finish using a bias facing.